Good day, listener, and welcome. If stories of grit, steel, and the echoes of history stir something in you, you're in the right place. The First Crusade. It was the year of our Lord 1096, and all of Christendom had been shaken. News had come from the east. Jerusalem, the holiest of cities, was barred to pilgrims. The infidels defiled what should be sacred, and their grip on the Holy Land had become an outrage before heaven. Pope Urban spoke in fire and thunder. He called for war, not a war of lords, but of God, a crusade, the first holy war. The faithful were to take up the cross and march east to liberate Jerusalem from the heathen. Sins would be washed away not by water, but by blood, theirs or their enemies. My name is Godefroy of Bayeux, and I was among the thousands who answered the call. I had fought in Sicily, Calabria, wherever my Lord led. I killed where it was needed and did not ask questions. My work was war, and I did it well. But before I set down my sword for good, I saw a chance to use it one last time for something greater. The Pope called us to the east. Jerusalem had fallen to heathens, and Christendom would have it back. My Lord Bohemond of Taranto took the cross, and I followed. He was a Norman prince, son of Robert Guiscard, who had carved out the kingdom of Sicily from the Saracens. Southern Italy had once been a patchwork of Byzantine holdings and Muslim emirates, but the Normans, hardened by northern wars and driven by ambition, had seized it by force and fire. Bohemond was among the greatest of them. I came from Normandy like many others, landless knights drawn south by war and the promise of spoils. In Bohemond's service, I had fought across Calabria and Sicily. I earned my place in blood and flame, and I would not turn from him now. After lengthy preparations, the ships were finally ready. That night, at his hall in Taranto, my lord hosted a great feast. The long tables were set with roasted meats, hard bread, and jugs of dark wine. Torches flickered against the stone walls, casting firelight across steel and scar. Men shouted toasts, banged cups, sang loudly and without tune. They knew what waited on the far side of the sea, and they embraced it with laughter and prayer. I sat near the hearth, a leg of lamb in one hand, the other wrapped around a wine cup. The heat on my face, the salt on my tongue, it all felt like a memory. I was still living. My Lord Bohemond rose. The hall fell quiet. He raised his hand, and every cup followed. "We ride to Jerusalem," he said, voice hard and clear, "and we will take it, or we will die on its walls." I stood with the others. I raised my cup. I swore the same. That night, we feasted like men with holy work ahead, and I knew, deep in my bones, that God had chosen the right men for it. At dawn, we rode to the coast. From Bari, we crossed the Adriatic by ship, just enough sea to carry us to the lands of the Greeks. Songs rose with the mist, proud and bold. Banners flew high, steel gleamed, and every man's voice rang with the promise of glory. It was the beginning of a holy campaign, full of pride and purpose. We rode for Bari first, down through the spine of Italy. The road was rough, but we kept pace. At the ports, we joined other lords and their men. The harbor stank of fish, sweat, and iron. Ships waited, creaking, wide-bellied things, not meant for knights, but they would serve. We loaded our horses with care. Some beasts kicked and brayed. Others stepped aboard like they'd done it before. My own, I led calmly. He trusted me, and I him. We'd ridden through worse. When the sails caught wind, I watched the coast of Christendom fade behind us. I did not look back. What lay behind was the world we knew. What lay ahead was the Lord's will. The sea was rough. Men grew sick. Some prayed, gripping the rails and whispering verses. I sat beneath the mast and sharpened my blade, praying not for calm seas, but for a righteous war. We landed near Dyrrhachium. The port was crowded with Romans. That is what they still called themselves. Their eyes watched every movement, cautious and calculating. We disembarked in silence, wary but proud, banners lowered but not hidden. At the docks, an official awaited us, cloaked in silk and flanked by guards. He greeted Bohemond stiffly, the words shaped in Latin, the tone far colder than the tongue. My lord answered with formality, but little warmth. The man bore a sealed writ from Emperor Alexios himself, granting us permission to pass through imperial lands, on condition of discipline and honor. Bohemond nodded, accepted it with grace, and handed the scroll to one of his scribes. No coin changed hands, but the weight of it was heavier than gold. I watched my lord's jaw tighten as he turned away. "They fear us," he said to me under his breath, "as they should, but they'll let us through." And so we rode east, away from the sea and into the lands of the Romans, not as guests, not as enemies, as something in between. We rode east through their lands. The mountains rose like thrones of stone, and the rain came like judgment. The roads were poor. Villages watched us with wary eyes. Some gave us bread and shelter, others turned their backs. When we were refused, we took what we needed, not with cruelty, only necessity. The locals called us barbarians. Let them. They did not carry the cross. My lord warned us, this land is rich in power, but weak in spirit. The Romans wear silk and cross themselves, but hesitate at the sword. Their empire survives on gold, not God. He taught us to ride with respect, but not reverence. To remember that we were not guests. We were the army of Christ. It took days to cross the peninsula. Rain and wind slowed us, and hunger made each mile feel longer. But we pressed on, and before long, we crested the last rise and saw the city, Constantinople. Tall white walls stretching to heaven, domes shining even under gray skies. The Queen of the East. We had crossed a sea and a kingdom. From the distance, Constantinople looked like a promise. I had never seen anything so vast, so gilded by glory. High walls rose from the earth like the ramparts of heaven. Gold domes shone in the morning light, catching the sun like shields of angels. I had seen cities before, stone keeps, walled towns. But this was the city of emperors, the heart of an empire that claimed the mantle of Rome. I stared, breath held, as if it might vanish if I blinked. For a moment I was not a knight, but a boy again, gazing upon a story made real. But the closer we rode, the more it stank of fear and politics. The city was crowded, merchants, eunuchs, Roman priests whispering behind silk sleeves. Their eyes followed us, not in admiration, in caution. If you're enjoying the story so far, a like and subscribe go a long way. Let's carry on. My lord had warned me. The Greeks would smile and plot at the same time. They wanted our swords, not our glory. The emperor, Alexios, played the game like a man used to surviving treachery by gold and ink, not blood. We were made to wait outside the city, camped like dogs, The rain turned the roads to rot. Still, no gate opened. Messengers came and went, not only from our ranks, but from others. There were other parties from the west, fellow Crusaders who had arrived by other roads or ships. I saw banners of lords I had only heard of, men from Provence, Flanders, and the Rhineland. Their faces were worn, their armor foreign, their tongues strange, but they had taken the same cross. We greeted some of them by firelight, exchanged news, stories, names. It was strange to meet so many called by the same cause, yet each bound to his own Lord, his own oath. There was unity in the cloth on our shoulders, but little in our command. Still, we waited. Some of ours grumbled. I didn't. This was how power spoke, quiet, patient, layered. I watched and listened. When word came that Bohemond was summoned to the palace, he took only a handful of men with him. I was among them. We rode in silence, the clatter of hooves on stone swallowed by the city's enormity. At every turn, Roman guards in gilded armor watched us with unreadable faces. No one smiled. This was not a place of welcome. The gates of the palace opened without fanfare, revealing a hall of gold-veined marble and high arches that echoed with nothing but our footsteps. Saints stared down at us from frescoes and woven tapestries, their expressions too calm, too distant for the world we came from. Bohemond moved with the ease of a man used to thrones and suspicion alike. I followed close, eyes on every guard, every door. There were no weapons drawn, but the danger hung thick in the incense-filled air. We were brought before Emperor Alexios. He sat above us, cloaked in silk, attended by priests, scribes, and eunuchs. He did not rise. He did not offer a hand. His eyes flicked across our faces like a merchant measuring coin. I had known kings, men who fought at the front and bled beside their men. Alexios was no such man. He ruled with parchment and policy, not with sword and shield. To me, he looked small beneath all that gold. He spoke in Latin, smooth and rehearsed, of unity, of old debts, of Rome reborn. But what he wanted was clear. Oaths. That we would return any land we reclaimed, that our swords would serve his empire as much as Christ. Bohemond did not flinch. He listened, gave little in reply, and asked sharp questions about supply, about roads, about what came after. His voice was even, but I knew that tone. He was measuring, not agreeing. When we left the palace, no one spoke. The silence followed us all the way back to the fire in camp. Bohemond sat and took a long drink from a clay cup, the kind of drink a man takes when his thoughts are louder than his words. The fire danced in his eyes, but his jaw was set like stone. He wants promises, he said at last, so we'll give him some. But to claim the kingdom of God, no mortal promise will bind us. No emperor's word can chain the will of heaven. Later that night, he stood before the others and swore the oath Alexios demanded. I stood beside him, silent, as always, bound by duty and loyalty. I had not spoken a word, but I knew the truth of it better than any scribe. My lord spoke the words, his voice firm, but his eyes hollow. He said what needed saying. I saw the weight in his shoulders, the anger wrapped in obedience. We did what needed doing, and I understood. This war was not about maps or emperors. It was about the holy promise to God himself, the redemption it offered. No king, no treaty, no worldly claim could match its weight. Within days, we crossed into Asia Minor. The river Bosphorus lay behind us, narrow but deep, dividing the empire from the wild. The moment our horses touched the far shore, it felt like the campaign had truly begun. The land was dry and open, with strange hills and the smell of dust and pine. This was the edge of Christendom, the frontier. We marched under Bohemond's command, our banners high. Ahead of us lay Nicaea, a fortress held by the Seljuk Turks. It had once belonged to the empire, but now it was theirs. Defended, reinforced, and dangerous. Months before, a mob of peasants had passed through these same lands, whipped into frenzy by preachers and hungry for holy war. They had no discipline, no command. The Turks cut them down like cattle. Their bones still lay in ditches beyond the passes. But that would not be our fate. The Turks were no rabble. I had seen enough of them by now to know better. They were horsemen, fast, cruel, and clever. They did not fight like us. No shield walls, no lines, no formal clash. They came like hawks, vanished like mist, and struck again, from a different quarter. But we were not peasants with farm tools and sermons. We were knights, disciplined, armored, and sworn. We carried mail and banners, not because they were beautiful, but because they meant something. We had oaths, and we marched not for plunder or fire, but for God. Nicaea was to be our first true test. When we neared the city, we made camp beyond bowshot. Scouts rode ahead. Siege towers began to rise. I stayed near my lord, as always, close enough to catch his orders, and close enough to know when he was watching and weighing the men around him. That night, under a canopy stitched with holes and torch smoke, the great men of the Crusade gathered. Bohemond, Godefroy of Bayeux, Raymond of Toulouse, and others whose names I barely knew, but whose titles shook tents when called. I stood behind my lord's shoulder and watched. They argued, as noblemen do. Raymond wanted saints. Bohemond wanted stone and fire. Godefroy, whose bearing I respected, spoke of honor. The Byzantines sent envoys, and those messengers stirred tension before they even opened their mouths. Bohemond warned us not to trust their numbers. I watched the way he watched them. Each of these lords believed in the cause, I do not doubt it, but they each believed in it in their own way. Some through politics, others through prophecy. And me? I believed in what I could hold, a sword, a shield, and the cross stitched to my tunic. Whatever their words, all agreed on this. Nicaea would fall, and it would fall to us to prove that the hand of God was with us. From the walls, the Turks taunted us. Their arrows hissed through the air, their jeers echoing into the dark. At night, they tested our lines with small raids, sharp and sudden, but they never broke through. We were ready. Even before the first stone flew, I knew this siege would grind us to the bone. The city was well held, its walls thick and proud, the garrison disciplined and supplied. They knew the ground better than we did, and they used it. But we pressed in all the same. I watched the siege towers grow from timber piles into towering beasts. Our engines hurled fire and stone, day after day, eating at their walls like time itself. We built trenches with our hands, mud and blood mixing beneath our boots. Every foot gained was paid for. I served at my lord's side, carrying messages, commanding companies, studying the field. It changed daily. New lines, new dangers, new dead. The cries of the wounded came with every dusk, and I learned to pray, without words. But I never lost sight of the cross. This was more than siegecraft. It was worship. Every strike on their walls was a blow for God. Every knight lost was a martyr. That was how I held fast. Then came the word. The emperor had sent ships overland, dragged in pieces and reassembled behind the city. They now controlled the lake, cutting off the last line of escape. The Turks were surrounded. The end was near. We made ready for the final charge, but it never came. At dawn, new banners flew above the towers. The city had surrendered, not to us, to the Romans. Emperor Alexios had moved in secret, while we bled in the mud. His agents opened talks with the Turks, offered mercy, gold, whatever it took. The city fell to them, not to us. They locked the gates behind them. Some of our knights were livid. They spat and shouted. But I was not surprised. My lord had said it from the beginning. The Romans would play for power, not glory. Let them. We had done the Lord's work. We had proven our strength before heaven. The blood was real, and God had seen it. And that was enough for now. The army did not linger long. The Council of Nobles was tense after Nicaea, but the cause remained firm. With the city behind us, the army split to march faster through the scorched paths of Anatolia. My lord rode with Bohemond's column, and I at his side. The sun came down like hammer blows. The ground cracked beneath our boots, and our throats dried fast. Water was scarce. The land was wide and foreign, hills of red earth, scattered trees, and skies that refused clouds. It tested the faithless, but the enemy had not forgotten us. The Turks watched, waited, measured our pace and our weakness, and when the land was against us and the heat at its worst, they struck. At Dorylaeum, their horsemen came like a storm, fast, howling, without warning. Bohemond's vanguard was hit first. His column had marched ahead with lighter supply, seeking water. The bulk of the army, led by Godfrey and Raymond, was still behind. Our formation was built to endure, not to chase. The baggage train lay in the center, ringed by tight blocks of infantry, mail-clad Normans, their kite shields high and helmets gleaming in the morning haze. Chain hauberks clinked with every shift, and over their shoulders hung the red cross on plain cloth. Archers and crossbowmen crouched behind the front line, bows strung and bolts ready. The footmen bore spears and short blades, their faces grim beneath steel caps. Bohemond held the front line, unshaken. My lord commanded the right flank, where the ground sloped slightly, a disadvantage we could not afford to yield. I stood beside him, shield raised, sweat already stinging my eyes. The dust clung to everything, mail, teeth, skin. It smelled of iron and waiting. The Turks rode circles around us, loose in arrows with practiced speed. They sought gaps, weakness, fear. But the line held. Our lords moved among the men, steadying them. There would be no retreat, no break. We prayed under our breath and waited. For God, for steel, for the banners of salvation. We had only time to form a defensive line. My lord took the right flank. I stood with him. The Turks shot from a distance, fast and light. They never closed, never charged, just circled, loosing arrows. They tried to break us with fear and fire, but we held. We covered our wounded. We rotated shields. We sang psalms between volleys. I knew God would test us. He tests all who carry his cross, and this was such a trial. The sun beat down. The arrows did not cease. The cries of the wounded weighed on every man. But we endured, not by strength alone, but by faith. We waited for aid, certain it would come. And then Godfrey's banners rose on the hills to the west, and Raymond's behind them. The Turks saw it, and the trap reversed. Now they were surrounded. I raised my sword and roared with the others. The moment was ours. We did not wait for commands. We charged, shields high, blades flashing in the sun. Our line rolled forward like a tide, iron and fire, and the breath of the righteous. The Turks scattered before us, or were slaughtered. Their horses screamed, their riders fled. That day, it was not their skill or courage that mattered. It was our unity, our faith. That day, we proved to heaven and to each other that the army of Christ could not be undone. The road to Jerusalem was still long, but the lands of the Turks were open to us now. The Turks broken, scattered, their will tested and found wanting. The way forward was ours to take. We advanced through Anatolia with confidence, though never without caution. The enemy had tasted our steel and knew now that we would not break. Yet we knew better than to grow soft in victory. After Dorylaeum, the land changed. Hills rolled into low plains, and the soil cracked with thirst. We passed through towns left empty, villages burned or abandoned by those who feared our coming, or worse, those who had already suffered the Turks' wrath. Fields lay fallow, wells were dry. Still, we pressed on. At every camp, my lord walked the fires. He spoke little, but his presence steadied the men. We carried the memory of Dorylaeum with us, not just in scars or trophies, but in the certainty that our cause was righteous. God had not only tested us, he had delivered us. By mid-October, we reached the outskirts of Antioch. We had entered the Syrian lands, once part of Christendom, now held by the Turk. These were no longer the empire's borderlands. This was enemy ground. Antioch stood before us. High walls, strong gates, rivers and mountains guarding its flanks. A city of stone, older than most kingdoms, and well held. Antioch would not fall easily, but it would fall. Antioch loomed like judgment. We had fought for every mile to reach its walls, and now we stood before the city that had once been the cradle of saints and martyrs. It was no ruin. Its defenses were whole. Towers thick and proud, gates barred, sentries sharp. The Turks inside had prepared. The leaders of the Crusade, Bohemond, Godefroy of Bayeux, Raymond of Toulouse, Robert of Normandy, and Hugh of Vermandois, met again. My lord stood quietly behind Bohemond, his place clear among the lesser captains. I watched the lords debate and scheme, but my loyalty remained fixed. Whatever their plans, my duty was to my lord and God. The army laid siege to Antioch in the name of Christ, and Christ alone. No more alliances, no more diplomacy. This was holy ground, and we would cleanse it. The camp swelled, tents, wagons, watchfires. Winter crept in. Rain turned the ground to filth, then frost. The river ran dark and cold. Disease whispered through the ranks. Men died with prayers on their lips. Others slipped away in the night, faithless and forgotten. But we who remained grew stronger. Still with us? If so, tap like and subscribe. More tales wait on the horizon. I watched as the gates were blocked and dug trenches and drove spikes with hands blistered and raw. The city resisted, hard and proud. From the walls, the Turks mocked us in every tongue they had, loosing arrows that sang past our ears or struck with sickening thuds. Some shouted promises of our deaths, others simply laughed. It was their way of hiding fear, I think. But they were not idle behind their walls. By night, they sent riders, fast, cruel, and without honor. They slipped through the hills and dark alleys like jackals, torching supply wagons, slitting the throats of sentries, always from behind, always from the shadows. They never faced us in the open. That was the measure of them. A night rides into the sun. These cowards skulked where no glory dwells. Still, it cost us. Watches were doubled. Some men refused to sleep, lying in armor with weapons close. I heard the clatter of hooves in my dreams, and woke more than once with sword in hand. Each morning began with counting the dead, and still we rebuilt. The noose tightened, the siege lines crept closer, the defenses thickened stone by stone. For every wagon burned, another was dragged forward. For every fallen brother, the psalms of vengeance rang louder. While the Turks burned their dead, I helped bury ours beneath the cross. I did not stop. I would not stop. This was not about land or coin. It was about Christ. Winter turned to spring, but the hunger did not ease. Rats fetched coin. Leather turned to meals. Men gnawed bone and swallowed pride. A full stomach was no proof against weakness, and still they stood. Still we all stood. Our banners flew, our prayers rose, our faith held. Because it must. Then, a whisper, a rumor. Word passed through the camp like wind in canvas. A man inside the city might be bought. His name was Firuz, the Armenian captain of the tower, tired of his Turkish overlords and hungry for gold and promise. Bohemond listened, watched, and acted. He arranged the meeting in secret. My lord vouched for the silence of those chosen to go. Firuz kept his word. His men, loyal to him, had cleared the battlements. As we crept through the dark, a rope was cast down. Bohemond led the climb, and I followed with the others, hand over bleeding hand. No arrows flew, no alarm was raised. The tower was already ours by betrayal, not by storm. Our danger was not from Firuz's men, but from noise that might rouse other towers nearby. Every slip, every clatter of steel could cost us the city. As the last of us crested the battlements, I turned from the tower and made for the gatehouse. Firuz's men had done more than betray their masters. They had cleared the path ahead, silenced the guards, and opened the way. The inner yard lay quiet under torchlight and fear, the stones slick with anticipation. I reached the great chain, thick with grease, and heaved. My arms burned. Another knight joined me, then another. We worked the winch with slow, grinding turns, every inch fought for against rust and weight. The hinges screamed as the gates began to rise. Iron clanked. The torchlight flickered in the sudden draft. I stepped back as the first spears pushed through, and the shadows of our host poured in, like the judgment of God. The Turks awoke to fire and steel. I saw their eyes, wide with panic, as we spilled into the streets. I drove my blade forward, cut through cloth, then skin, then bone. The air stank of blood and smoke. Screams rang from stone walls and echoed across rooftops. There were no rules left, no mercy. Those who had mocked us, starved us, hunted us from their towers. We gave them only death in return. I stepped over the fallen, pushed through alleys slick with blood. Men fled before us. Others stood and died. I saw Crusaders tear down gates, storm houses, shout praises as they fought. Antioch burned. In some quarters, black smoke curled into heaven. In others, hymns rose. cracked voices of knights giving thanks in shattered chapels. But not all we met were foes. The Greek and Armenian Christians we spared. Some called to us from windows. Others rushed into the street when they saw the cross on our tunics. They wept, they knelt, they kissed our hands. One old man clutched my cloak and whispered, "God has not forgotten us." When the fighting dulled and the shouts fell quiet, I slipped away from the others. I found a church, half buried in rubble, roof charred black. I pushed the doors open with my shoulder. Inside, the altar was cracked, the walls smoke dark. Icons stared down through layers of soot. I knelt in silence, sword at my side, hands still red. I did not speak aloud. I did not need to. I thanked God for the strength to endure. I asked Him to remember the dead, ours and theirs. I asked Him to make me worthy of what came next. I knelt there, in the silence, sword at my side, hands still red. I thanked God for victory. I asked Him to remember the faithful, to forgive the fallen, and to grant me strength for what lay ahead. The city, at last, was ours, but we had no time to celebrate. Barely 3 days after Antioch fell into our hands, Kerbogha of Mosul, a great general of the Turks, descended upon us, leading tens of thousands. He swept across the land like a storm summoned by vengeance. Before the blood on our blades had dried, we were encircled. Now we were the besieged. Now we tasted what we had given. Desperation turned to fervor. In the streets and broken churches, knights fell to their knees, not to sharpen swords, but to lift prayers to heaven. Some dug in the ruined chapels and buried altars, seeking signs, relics, anything that might prove that God had not abandoned us. I remember the sight: mail-clad men, caked in blood and mud, tearing at cracked stone with bare hands, chanting psalms between grunts and gasps. They dug not for treasure, but for salvation. Hope was a weapon as sharp as any blade, and when a relic was found, or claimed, faith caught fire. We rose from the dust with new fury, ready to answer God's call, or die with His name on our lips. The food within the city had already run low when we took it. Stores were fewer than hoped, scattered or hidden, many spoiled or already consumed. Hunger returned quickly. What little we found, we rationed with discipline. But it could not last. The first week was marked by fear and disbelief. Men who had stormed walls and torn down gates now grew hollow-eyed with doubt. Bread grew thinner, water fouler. We counted each crust, each skin of wine, as if it were gold. By the second week, disease began its work. Fever swept the city. Wounds festered. Men once proud enough to mock death in battle now prayed not to die nameless in the mud. Yet the walls of Antioch held our will together. We had taken the city for Christ, and we would not surrender it. The third week was hunger pure and raw. We slaughtered horses. Rats fetched coin enough to buy a sword. Men boiled leather for broth. Strength failed in the limbs before it failed in the heart. I saw knights too weak to lift their blades, still kneel to pray. The fourth week was for miracles or madness. Some dug in the broken churches, tearing at the rubble with axes, picks, and whatever tools they could find. They sought relics, signs, anything to prove that God still walked among us. Food ran dry. Hope cracked. And still the army did not break. Then came the lance, a vision, a digging, and a relic, the very spear that pierced the side of Christ. Peter the hermit called it divine. Others called it madness. I called it the only hope we had. The relic, This spear of Longinus was raised in triumph and borne through the camp like a banner from heaven. Some kissed it, others wept. I knelt before it, heart pounding, and knew without doubt that it was true. God had sent his sign. He had not abandoned us. He had marked us for victory, if only we had the faith to seize it. When the sun rose, it rose on a new army, half starved, half broken, but burning with purpose. Throughout the night, messengers had gone to every corner of the city. Orders were passed from mouth to mouth. Every knight, every footman, every crossbowman was to be ready at the first light. Our companies gathered at the gates, armor strapped, weapons blessed, oaths whispered one final time. There would be no delay, no confusion. The signal would be the opening of the gates, and at that moment we would charge as one. When the sun rose, it rose on a new army, half starved, half broken, but burning with purpose. Throughout the night, messengers had gone to every corner of the city. Orders were passed from mouth to mouth. Every knight, every footman, every crossbowman was to be ready at the first light. Our companies gathered at the gates, armor strapped, weapons blessed, oaths whispered one final time. There would be no delay, no confusion. The signal would be the opening of the gates, and at that moment we would charge as one. The gates of Antioch swung wide before me, and I felt the roar rise from my own chest as much as from the men around me. Trumpets and horns split the morning air, a thunderous call that shook the stones themselves. We charged like lions loosed from their cage, and I, Godefroy of Bayeux, was among the first to surge forward, shield locked tight against my body, sword eager in my hand. Bohemond, my lord, led the vanguard, a towering figure with his blade high, his voice like thunder calling us onward. I rode at his side, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a fury so pure it felt like prayer. The gates of Antioch swung wide before me, and I felt the roar rise from my own chest as much as from the men around me. Trumpets and horns split the morning air, a thunderous call that shook the stones themselves. We charged like lions loosed from their cage, and I, Godefroy of Bayeux, was among the first to surge forward, shield locked tight against my body, sword eager in my hand. Bohemond, my lord, led the vanguard, a towering figure with his blade high, his voice like thunder calling us onward. I rode at his side, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a fury so pure it felt like prayer. The ground shook beneath the hooves of our horses, a song of steel and righteous wrath. Ahead, the Turks wavered, caught in confusion, their banners snapping like dying birds in the rising sun. They had not expected such fury, such righteous fire. Their lines sagged, stumbled, and shattered as we struck, as if God himself had hurled us against them. They fled and broke before us like chaff in a holy storm. The ground shook beneath the hooves of our horses, a song of steel and righteous wrath. Ahead, the Turks wavered, caught in confusion, their banners snapping like dying birds in the rising sun. They had not expected such fury, such righteous fire. Their lines sagged, stumbled, and shattered as we struck, as if God himself had hurled us against them. They fled and broke before us like chaff in a holy storm. I saw their faces, eyes wide, mouths open in terror, as our lances found them, as our blades carved paths through their ranks. They who had besieged us, mocked us, starved us, now fled like sheep before the wolves. The cries of the dying filled the air. but louder still rose the psalms from our throats. Songs of vengeance, of faith, of glory earned at sword's point. I saw their faces, eyes wide, mouths open in terror, as our lances found them, as our blades carved paths through their ranks. They who had besieged us, mocked us, starved us, now fled like sheep before the wolves. The cries of the dying filled the air, but louder still rose the psalms from our throats. Songs of vengeance, of faith, of glory earned at sword's point. Behind me, the walls of Antioch gleamed red in the dawn. Before me, the fields ran with blood and dust. And beyond, far beyond, waited Jerusalem, a crown not yet taken, but promised. God had not abandoned me. He had not abandoned his army, not at Nicaea, where we endured, not at Dorylaeum, where we triumphed, not at Antioch, where we rose from the grave itself, and never, so long as breath filled my chest and the cross burned upon my heart. Behind me, the walls of Antioch gleamed red in the dawn. Before me, the fields ran with blood and dust, and beyond, far beyond, waited Jerusalem, a crown not yet taken, but promised. God had not abandoned me. He had not abandoned his army, not at Nicaea, where we endured, not at Dorylaeum, where we triumphed, not at Antioch, where we rose from the grave itself, and never, so long as breath filled my chest and the cross burned upon my heart. For more stories, like and subscribe.